KirTop here, and these are 100 traces of ancient civilizations we never noticed. Egyptian artifacts in Antarctica. This story sounds like science fiction, but some sources, including reports from military expeditions during World War II, point to strange finds in the Queen Maud Land region of Antarctica. Among them are fragments of columns allegedly covered in hieroglyphs and the remains of stone structures resembling Egyptian capitals. None of this has been officially recognized, and all the objects have either disappeared or have been declared natural formations. But the question remains, where did this evidence come from? One theory suggests that in ancient times Antarctica was not covered in ice. The Piri Reis map, compiled in the 16th century, shows the outlines of the continent's coastline under the ice, with an accuracy that modern cartographers have only achieved with the help of satellites. How did a cartographer from the 1500s know this? And if he didn't know, who did he copy from? Some alternative researchers believe that civilizations could move between continents long before our understanding of migration. If Egypt really was part of a network spanning the Earth, then perhaps its traces can really be found in the most unexpected places, where no one is looking. One private report leaked online spoke of a fragment of an artifact found in an ice cave, metal, an unknown alloy, engravings, undeciphered symbols close to Egyptian. But the artifact disappeared, and all the participants of the expedition signed a non-disclosure agreement. Darius's gold. During excavations in Persepolis, workers discovered a stone box laid beneath the foundation of the Apadana Palace. Inside were two thin plates, one gold, one silver. They were placed there during construction approximately 2,500 years ago during the reign of Darius the Great. Both plates contain cuneiform inscriptions in 3 languages. It was important to Darius that the text be understood across the vast empire. It lists lands, emphasizes his power, and thanks Ahura Mazda. This is not a decorative object or part of a ritual. It is a declaration of who built here, who owned the territory, and under which god the palace stood. The plates are as well preserved as if they had just been removed from the workshop. The metal is uncracked and the inscriptions are easily read. They were deliberately hidden in the foundation, not as a secret but as a sign for future generations should anyone ever peer beneath the stone. Cleopatra's sunken port. Off the coast near Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria, archaeologists have discovered a submerged site with evidence of an ancient harbor. Kathleen Martinez's team, along with marine archaeologist Bob Ballard, describes rows of massive foundations, estimated to be over 6 meters high, cemented blocks, column fragments, amphorae for storage and transport, and most importantly, numerous anchors dating to the reign of Cleopatra VII. Such an array of artifacts typically accompany a working port, mooring lines, storage areas, and navigational equipment. In 2022, a 1,227-meter-long underground tunnel extending to the Mediterranean Sea was discovered here. Its filling contained pottery and artifacts dating back to the Ptolemaic period. The harbor may have served the city complex and temple of Taposiris Magna, and during Cleopatra's reign, her fleet. This is supported by the dating and marine profile of the finds, but further pitting, dating of sediments, and linking of the structures to the ancient coastline are needed. If confirmed, we will gain rare evidence of the appearance and operation of the coastal network near the Ptolemaic capital, not in texts but in stone, wood, and iron. The Emperor behind the curtain. When Roman sources mention 27 BC, they describe it as the year the Republic ended. The Senate hands power over to Octavian, who takes the title of Augustus, and from that moment on, Rome officially becomes an empire. This scene has been described dozens of times, and it always seems the same. Tired senators, a young ruler who supposedly doesn't want power, and a state that begs him to stay. But if you strip away the beautiful retelling and look at the documents of this period, a strangeness emerges that is usually unexplained. In those decisive years, when Rome is essentially being rebuilt from scratch, almost all the real action is not performed by Augustus. I first noticed this when I looked at the list of offices Augustus handed out after Actium. There are consuls, proconsuls, governors, military tribunes, but one name is repeated too often, always in practical matters: Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. He is appointed to command the fleet, he is sent to resolve crises, he is placed in the most unstable areas. This could be attributed to trust, if not for one detail. Almost none of Augustus's major decisions are carried out without him. The victory at Actium is formalized politically by Augustus, but it was Agrippa who won it. Control over Italy is maintained not through the Senate, but through a network of military commands, which he also directs. When water shortages begin in Rome, it is Agrippa who is empowered to restore the aqueducts. When the port at Ostia needs to be rebuilt, he is again responsible. When a rebellion needs to be suppressed, he is dispatched. In the sources, he is not an advisor, but an executor. Reading the texts one by one gets the feeling that Augustus hardly makes any decisions himself. He approves, signs, but the real action happens through one person. And this begins to look not like friendship, but like a scheme. In Rome, such schemes don't last long. Overly powerful assistants are removed, as dozens were before him. But Agrippa is not removed. In fact, his powers grow. In 18 BC, Augustus gave him his daughter Julia. It's a political move, but a strange one if you look closely. Agrippa isn't from a noble family, not from the old elite, not one of those typically integrated into a dynasty. He's a man of action, a soldier, an administrator, an engineer, and yet he becomes part of the family. This means that Augustus doesn't simply trust him, but connects with him on a level where betrayal is impossible. And here arises the next question, rarely asked directly. If Agrippa is so important, why is he never a symbol of power? The answer can be found in his titles. Augustus embodies everything associated with the image: pontiff, tribune, defender of the republic, father of the fatherland. Agrippa receives something different. He receives imperium, the right to act. His power is not symbolic, but functional, and the more you look at this distribution of roles, the clearer it becomes that this is not a temporary solution, but a stable structure. One holds the public sphere, the other holds the system. This is especially evident when Agrippa dies in 12 BC. After his death, Augustus doesn't simply lose an assistant. A series of decisions begins that seem strange, ineffective, and belated. Revolts take longer to suppress, provinces spiral out of control, succession crises become increasingly acute. Augustus remains the same, but the system begins to falter, and this is evident even in small details. Construction slows, administrative reforms falter, the army begins to operate less smoothly. This isn't a collapse, but it is a loss of precision. And here comes an unpleasant feeling that's hard to ignore. If a man without the title of emperor was so important that the system began to crumble after his death, then he wasn't a minor figure. This means that the official history has missed something fundamentally important. And if this happened in Rome, the most documented civilization of antiquity, then the question becomes broader. Is this an isolated incident or a repeating pattern? And if it is a pattern, how many times have we seen it before without realizing it? It's from this moment that Augustus's story ceases to be the story of one man and begins to look like the first recorded example of a different power structure. Vintage time capsule. Experienced treasure hunter Jane Eastman recently made an unusual discovery at the bottom of a river in England. She found a Victorian glass bottle filled with pickles. Jane showed this amazing treasure to her Instagram followers, where her find caused a heated discussion. The bottle, made of green water glass, was in excellent condition, and its lid with the inscription W&D Harvest Dowgate Dock London prompted Jane to research its history. She found out that W&D Harvest was a company selling spices and pickles in London since the 1870s, and the bottle she found probably dates back to the period 1890 to 1910. According to Jane, the bottle was completely sealed, so the pickles were preserved. The woman called it a real time capsule and decided not to open the find to preserve it in its original condition. To do this, she sealed the lid with sealing wax. Long pickle jars were popular in the Victorian era due to their practicality. The only thing that is not yet clear is whether the cucumbers remained edible. Glass that has endured the centuries. In a European museum lies an object that at first glance resembles a designer bowl from a modern glass-blowing studio. Thin stripes of multicolored glass twist into a spiral, creating a dense, even pattern. But this piece is approximately 2,250 years old. It was made during the Hellenistic era. Back then, glass blowing was not yet a skill that would emerge later. The bowl was handcrafted, The finest threads of molten glass were wound around a mold, layer by layer, until the vessel acquired the desired volume and pattern. Each thread was placed with millimeter precision. The colored spirals have not faded, the glass has not clouded. The vessel retains its shape as if it had just left the master's workbench. Such objects rarely survive to this day. Glass breaks, cracks, and shatters easily. Therefore, each such object is a window into the past, into a craft that stood at the intersection of art and technology. The bowl shows that ancient craftsmen were no simpler or more primitive than us. They already knew how to work with the material as if they understood its capabilities better than we do. 3 missing artifacts. When engineer Wayman Dixon descended into a narrow passageway inside the Great Pyramid in 1872, he hardly expected to stumble upon one of Egypt's strangest mysteries. From a deep ventilation shaft just a few inches wide, he pulled out 3 objects: a stone ball, a copper hook, and a piece of cedar wood. Everything was primitive in appearance, but that's what raised questions. Why were such things hidden in a hard-to-reach shaft? Who placed them there and how? These finds, later known as the Dixon relics, immediately became surrounded by myths. The stone was perfectly smooth, as if chiseled. The hook was oddly shaped, more like a tool than a relic. But the wooden fragment became the most mystical part of the story. After being transferred to Edinburgh, it disappeared, just vanished. For decades. Only in the 2020s was part of the wood accidentally discovered in a box among forgotten collections. Analysis showed an age of over 5,000 years, possibly older than the pyramid itself. Why is this hardly talked about? Why is no one rushing to explore it deeper? It seems that these 3 objects are the key, not to the sarcophagus, but to something more ancient, more frightening, to a secret that the pyramid still hides from us. Amber Bowl. This magnificent amber bowl, which is approximately 3,270 years old, was found in a large round barrow in Hove, England during excavations in 1856. Amber, a material known for its beauty and associated with the sun and life force, was used in ancient times not only for decoration, but also for ritual purposes. The discovered bowl, according to researchers, could have been a high-status item belonging to an important member of society or a chieftain. Creating such a bowl required exceptional skills because amber is a fragile material and working with it requires patience and skill. The discovered bowl shows that people of that time had access to rare and valuable materials, which also confirms the existence of trade links and exchange with other regions. The fact that the bowl was buried with its owner speaks of its significance for funerary rites or belief in the afterlife. Power before the pharaoh. When I began searching for whether the Roman model was repeated in other civilizations, I deliberately went to where power had always seemed most sacred: Egypt. If anywhere the person and the mechanism were supposed to coincide, it was where the pharaoh was considered a god. But Egypt turned out to be the most disturbing confirmation that Rome was not the exception, but the rule. The official history of Thutmose III appears impeccable. He is called Egypt's greatest military leader, a conqueror who expanded the state's borders further than anyone before him. He reigned for over 50 years, winning dozens of campaigns and creating an empire. But if we look not at the end, but at the beginning of his reign, a gap appears, which is usually explained with a single line and then quickly ignored. For the first 20 years, he does not rule. Formally, he is pharaoh, but real power lies in the hands of Hatshepsut. This is not a controversial version. This is recorded on the temple walls, in the titulary, in inscriptions, and in official depictions. Hatshepsut bears full royal titles, is depicted as a man, performs rituals, oversees construction, and controls the economy and trade. Thutmose during this time exists as a shadow, a figure who cannot be removed, but also cannot be allowed to govern. He is present in reliefs, but not in decisions. This situation is often explained as a temporary anomaly, but upon closer examination it appears to be a stable structure. Hatshepsut is not simply a regent. She controls the system. Under her, temples are built, trade with Punt develops, the administration is strengthened, and Egypt is stable. Thutmose during this time is learning military skills, but he does not make decisions. And most importantly, he does not destroy anything. He waits. When Hatshepsut dies, something happens that Egyptologists have long puzzled over. Several years after her death, the systematic erasure of her name begins. Reliefs are knocked down, cartouches are carved, statues are smashed, images are slashed. This isn't spontaneous revenge or a fit of rage. This is careful, long-term work spread out over decades. And it doesn't begin immediately, but only after the system has already come under Thutmose's control. And here the same question arises as in Rome. If Hatshepsut was a usurper, why wasn't she destroyed immediately? Why did they wait? And if Thutmose was a true ruler, why did his greatness begin only after the man who held the system together disappears? When you look at the campaigns of Thutmose III chronologically, it becomes clear that they occur after Egypt has been fully stabilized. He doesn't build an empire from scratch, he uses an existing administrative machine. The economy is functioning, supplies are established, officials are trained, temples are resourced, logistics are in place. This allows him to wage continuous military campaigns, but none of this is his work. This is a legacy. And the more you look at Thutmose's actions after Hatshepsut's death, the clearer it becomes that he was doing more than just conquering. He was rewriting memory. He was removing from history a figure without whom his own greatness would have no basis. This isn't simply erasing a name, it's replacing a mechanism with a face. Egypt should remember one pharaoh, not a system in which real power belonged to another. Here the pattern is repeated almost perfectly. One person holds control, another becomes a symbol. The first disappears from memory, the second remains in legend. But there is an important difference from Rome. In Egypt, the process of erasure is physically visible. It can be touched. It is carved in stone. It is the trace of history cleaning out the display case and removing the mechanism. And it is at this moment that it becomes clear that the Roman case is neither unique nor accidental. It is simply better documented. Egypt shows that this pattern is older, deeper, and perhaps more fundamental than we are accustomed to thinking. If even in a civilization where the ruler was a god, power could be divided between an individual and a system, then this isn't unique to Rome. It's a basic construct of power that repeats itself regardless of culture, religion, or era. After Egypt, I found it hard to see Augustus as an exception. There were too many similarities, and then I realized that what we need to look for next isn't similar biographies, but similar consequences. Because if this pattern is real, then there must be moments in history when the mechanism disappears, but the individual remains, and then the system begins to collapse. And such moments do exist. They simply aren't connected. Fossil shell jewelry. Beads made from fossilized marine mollusks were found in the El Tesoro and Cueva del Hoyo de la Mina caves in southern Spain. These are cephalopod shells from ancient coastal deposits near Malaga. The shells themselves are much older than the people who wore them. Late Paleolithic and Neolithic collectors selected almost exclusively two species, Paradisum inequale and Paradentalium sexangulum, although the remains of 24 other species were found nearby. In total, the researchers described 37 fragments. Some date back to the Magdalenian, approximately 17,000 years ago, others to the later Neolithic. The shells show signs of processing. They were cleaned, polished, and in places coated with red ochre. In El Tesoro, individual fragments were inserted into one another to form a simple clasp. Why these two species were chosen remains unclear. Perhaps for their convenient shape, the strength of their walls, or the color after polishing in ochre. However, the repeatability of selection across different sites indicates a consistent practice, not a random selection. Parallels are found further afield. In Europe, there are Neanderthal finds of ancient seashells, and in South Africa, a Homo sapiens trophy, a fossilized trilobite, has been found. It appears that fossil jewelry is not a rare whim, but a deliberate choice of material and taste. The first forest appeared in Russia. In Russia, near Luga in the Tolmachevsky quarry, they found something you usually see in textbooks, not in the sand near a quarry, a fossilized tree stump with real roots. It's approximately 385 million years old, dating back to the late Devonian, a time when land was just beginning to turn green. At first, everyone assumed it was a prototaxite, ancient columnar organisms famous in these parts, but the roots proved it was a tree, not a mushroom-shaped column. An amateur paleontologist discovered the find. He spotted a large piece of rock in the sand, unlike a typical rock, and showed it to specialists. Scientists from St. Petersburg State University then joined in, carefully excavated it, documented it, and sent the sample to the lab. There, thin sections and tissue structure will be used to determine the species and age. What's important is that the first tree stands were already here. The root system held the soil, changed water flow, and influenced the carbon balance. Simply put, the very forest planet we're accustomed to was just beginning. A lot of science and terminology can be piled up here, but the gist is simple. Scientists were looking for a giant mushroom and instead discovered the ancestor of our forests. Now they have to compare the sample with known Devonian trees and pinpoint its true identity. Even if the species name is still in question, the discovery itself is already changing the local picture of the past. A medieval helmet on Mars. On August 5th, the Perseverance rover photographed a strange rock. In the image, it looked like an old helmet half buried in sand. The top was sharp, the sides smoothly converged, and the surface was covered with numerous tiny spheres. Scientists named the discovery Horniflya and immediately noted that such a texture had never been seen on Mars. These tiny balls are spherules, mineral formations that form through weathering, sedimentation, or the action of water. But on Horniflya, there are so many of them that the entire surface appears to be strewn with pearls. This cannot be explained by simple erosion. Perhaps groundwater saturated with mineral salts flowed through the rocks for millions of years and each drop left a mark. Or conversely, a flow of hot gases etched the surface, leaving behind scorched bubbles. The rover's instruments have recorded similar structures before, but never in such numbers. On Earth, such a formation is typical of areas with active hydrothermal activity, places where underground water meets heat. If this analogy is correct, then Jezero Crater was home to more than just moisture, but to a circulation similar to that which sustains life at underwater volcanoes. Perseverance is currently working on the northern edge of the crater, ascending through sedimentary layers like an archaeologist traversing the floors of an ancient city. And with each meter higher, it becomes increasingly clear. This helmet is not a random shape, but yet another reminder that the planet wasn't always a dead desert. Spanish Stonehenge. This amazing megalithic monument, known as the Spanish Stonehenge, is located on the banks of the Tagus River in Spain. Its age is estimated at about 7,000 years, which makes it 2,000 years older than the famous Stonehenge in England and older than the Egyptian pyramids. The complex consists of more than 100 vertically installed granite stones, forming a circle and ellipses. Officially, this object is called the Guadalperral Dolmen, and its purpose still remains a mystery. Scientists suggest that it could have served as a place of rituals, a temple, and possibly an astronomical observatory. The stones are arranged in such a way that their orientation is related to the position of the sun at certain times of the year. This confirms that the ancient builders had a deep knowledge of astronomy. For a long time, the dolmen was underwater due to the construction of a dam in 1963, and only a recent drought allowed archaeologists and researchers to take another look at this amazing object. What inspired ancient people to create such a grandiose structure? Governance without a crown. When Napoleon came to power, France no longer had a state. There were debts, ruined institutions, and an army that existed on its own. Textbooks call this the chaos of revolution, but the documents paint a different picture. The system of government wasn't destroyed, it simply ceased to function. And it was at this moment that a man appeared at Napoleon's side who didn't command armies, didn't win battles, and was almost never near the battlefield. His name was Charles Maurice de Talleyrand. In 1799, a few weeks before the coup of 18 Brumaire, Talleyrand returned from disgrace and became Minister of Foreign Affairs. Formally, he was a diplomat. In fact, he was the only person negotiating with all parties simultaneously. While Napoleon was seizing power, Talleyrand negotiated with those who recognized it. He held ambassadors, froze decisions, and promised guarantees that no one but he controlled. All information passed through him, and that's precisely why, after the coup, France is recognized almost immediately, although logically it should have been strangled by a blockade. In the following years, the pattern repeats itself. Napoleon wages wars, and Talleyrand shapes their consequences. He signs treaties, changes the wording, and leaves loopholes that allow France to emerge from defeat with minimal losses. The This is evident in Tilsit, Pressburg, and Luneville. Napoleon wins battles, but the state survives not because of victories, but because of how their results are formalized. And each time, this is accomplished by one man. The most crucial moment comes after 1812, when Napoleon effectively loses the war. At that moment, the system should have collapsed, but it doesn't. Because Talleyrand doesn't leave with Napoleon, he stays. Moreover, he begins negotiations against him. This looks like betrayal, but looking at the documents, it looks like the preservation of the mechanism. He negotiates with the victors so that France won't be destroyed, so that it won't be divided, so that it remains a state. And he succeeds. In 1815, after Waterloo, France remains a great power. This can't be explained by military logic, it can only be explained by administrative one. After Napoleon's fall, Talleyrand becomes part of a new regime, then the next, then the next. Flags, emperors, kings change, but he remains. Because he's not a symbol, he's a function. And as long as he exists, the system works. When he dies, France enters decades of instability, regime changes, revolutions, and crises. It's no longer an instant collapse, but the disappearance of the mechanism is immediately felt. This block isn't important because of Napoleon. It's important because it shows the next phase of the diagram. In Rome and Egypt, the mechanism dies with the person. In Europe, the mechanism outlives the person. And this changes everything. This means the system is evolving. This means these people aren't random helpers. This means that the authorities have long since learned to separate themselves from those who represent them. Desert tunnels leading to nowhere. There are places in Egypt where tourists are not allowed, not because it is dangerous, but because there are too many questions. One such area is located just south of the Giza complex. Under a layer of sand is a network of tunnels, filled in and forgotten, or filled in deliberately. For decades, locals have been talking about empty halls under the sand, where echoes, drafts, and even smells can be heard, as if there is air underground. But officially, there is nothing there, and everything that was accidentally discovered was quickly filled back in. In the 2010s, a group of researchers received a rare permit for ground-penetrating radar scanning, and they discovered long straight structures under the surface, possibly corridors, some with turns, length tens of meters, depth about 5. All of them ran strictly parallel to the main axis of the plateau. But as soon as the data got into the press, permission for further work was revoked. The cameras were removed and the sand was returned to its place. There are photos that show that some of the mines began in crevices among old ruins, stone slopes, steps that seemed to lead down, and all of this was roughly sealed with cement and brick. On one of these walls, someone left a word in English with a nail. Silenced. No one knows who wrote it. But too many things indicate that Egypt is not what lies on the surface, but what is underneath it. And it is very important to someone that we do not go down there. Bone multi-tool. Belgium, Skladina Cave. Archaeologists find the tibia of a cave lion, a giant predator that Neanderthals themselves usually feared. But this bone has experienced a second life. It has 4 different tools. One end is a chisel for gouging out wood. The long side is ground down and used to sharpen flint blades. The adjacent area is smoothed into a round scraper for cleaning skins. The opposite end is left sharp to pierce skin or hides. The age of the layer is about 130,000 years, the end of the Sol glaciation. The people who left the multi-tool did not simply break the bone for the sake of the tip. They invented a real ancestor of the Swiss knife. Small notches are preserved on the surface, traces of at least 2 stages of sharpening. This is both economy and technology. Instead of 4 separate devices, there is one, but modular. The fact that lion bone was chosen as the material is also noteworthy. Thick-walled, elastic, it holds the cutting edge longer than deer bone. This means that killing a predator became not only a victory in hunting, but also a supplier of premium raw materials for future weapons and tools. As a result, we see the first multifunctional in history. The Stone Age did not need rivets to invent the principle of the Swiss knife. Thuringian dagger. After heavy rains near the village of Gütersleben, northern Thuringia, a bronze dagger emerged from the soil. The finder didn't retrieve it and reported it to archaeologists. A restoration workshop in Weimar confirmed that it was a Bronze Age dagger, approximately 3,500 years old. It had a plate handle. The wide, flat heel of the blade was attached to the handle with rivets, usually made of wood, horn, or bone. The technology was complex for its time, casting a bronze plate, honing the edge, grinding the base of the handle, and drilling holes for the rivets. On such objects, the rivet marks reveal how the handle was held in place and whether the blade could withstand the load. Next comes alloy analysis, proportion of tin and impurities, X-rays, and corrosion stabilization. If organic matter remains on the handle, it will be possible to reconstruct the shape of the hilt. The artifact was found without a grave or cultural layer. It was likely pushed to the surface by shifting karst soil after a heavy rain. In any case, it is a valuable find. Direct evidence of crafts and exchanges in central Germany during the Bronze Age. Such daggers could have been working weapons, a status symbol, or a gift to the earth. An examination will reveal the exact scenario. Unauthorized searches are prohibited in the region, and prompt reporting of a find preserves both the object and information about it. After examination, the dagger is planned to be displayed at the Elric Regional Museum, from the field to a display case with a clear history of its origin. Artificial eye. Here is the oldest known artificial eye in the world, which was found in a woman's burial in the burnt city, Shahi-e-Sukhteh, in Iran. This unique artifact is over 4,800 years old. The eye prosthesis was a hemisphere made of a lightweight material based on bitumen paste. It was covered in gold and its surface had slits imitating the pupil, which gave it a realistic appearance. The prosthesis was secured with two small holes through which a cord, similar to a modern bandage, was passed, which allowed it to be held in place. The woman wore this eye during the day to hide the empty eye socket, and at night she carefully stored it in a leather pouch found along with other burial items. Such a level of craftsmanship and care for appearance amazes even modern researchers. This find testifies to the high level of medical and craft knowledge of the ancient civilization, as well as the desire of people of that time to preserve their appearance and maintain dignity. An empire without an emperor. In Russian history, there's a strange gap between the image of Peter and how the system actually functioned under him. Peter travels, fights, builds, and reforms, but if you look at the documents, most of the specific decisions don't go through him. They go through Alexander Menshikov. His signature appears on decrees, his name is on orders, his people oversee construction, supplies, mobilization, tax collection, and the work of the army. Formally, he's the favorite. In fact, he's the executive center of the entire reform. When Peter goes abroad, governance doesn't stop. When Peter is ill, decisions continue to be made. When Peter disappears for months, the country doesn't collapse. This is only possible if the system of governance is already separated from the ruler's personality. And this system is concentrated in the hands of one man. Menshikov is not just an assistant. He controls all the points where power translates into action: money, people, supplies, construction, the army. He is not a symbol, he is a mechanism. The most revealing thing happens after Peter's death. At this point, Russia should descend into chaos because the heir is weak, the elite is divided, and the reforms are not consolidated. But there is no chaos, because Menshikov remains. He effectively places Catherine I on the throne, governs the state in her name, controls the guard, the Senate, and the finances. The system continues to function as long as he remains in power, and then he is removed. Not immediately, not abruptly, but he is removed. Exiled, stripped of his titles, erased from power. And immediately after, Russia enters a period of instability that lasts almost 20 years. A change of rulers, palace coups, elite infighting, a loss of reform momentum. This is no coincidence. This is the moment when the mechanism disappears and the person is left without control. In official history, Menshikov is a corrupt official, a favorite, a random person. But if we look at the consequences, he was the only one who held the system together after Peter's death. And that is precisely why he had to be erased from memory as a figure of power. He could not be left as Peter's equal, because then the very idea of a lone reformer collapses. The risen Telamon. This unique Atlantean from the Temple of Zeus in the ancient city of Agrigento in Sicily is one of the most impressive examples of monumental sculpture of the 5th century BC. The temple, built in the Doric style, was considered one of the largest temples of the ancient world, and its architecture reflected the power of Greek civilization. The telemons, which acted as supports, had a symbolic meaning depicting the titanic force supporting the sky or the enormous weight of an architectural structure. These giant statues, about 7.5 meters high, were impressive both in their detail and size. One of the telemons was restored and installed in its original place, demonstrating the complexity of the engineering and artistic solutions of the ancient masters. But there are myths and mysteries surrounding the Atlanteans. Some researchers believe that the images of the Titans could reflect ancient myths about the confrontation between the gods and giants, and their position in the temple symbolized their conquest. Others believe that such sizes and shapes could have been used as images of extraterrestrial beings, which the ancient inhabitants believed in. Eerie Harp. A harp over 3,000 years old is a unique artifact of ancient Egypt stored in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This exquisite musical instrument dates back to 1390 to 1295 BC, which corresponds to the reign of the New Kingdom. The harp is made of wood and is 82 centimeters long. Its neck is topped with a sculpted image of the head of a Nubian captive. This is not just a decorative element, but a symbolic image probably associated with the triumph of the Egyptians in military campaigns. The strings of the harp, visually tying the head of the captive, may be a metaphor for conquest. The preservation of the object is amazing, given its age. Such instruments were used not only for entertainment, but also in ritual ceremonies, which emphasizes their importance in the culture of ancient Egypt. Are these finds really 300 million years old? From time to time, miners find strange artifacts in coal seams that appear to have been created by intelligent beings. This poses some awkward questions for science since the age of these rocks is estimated at 300 million years. How could objects that were clearly made by hand get there? After all, at that time, the Earth was inhabited only by giant insects and the first reptiles, and there was no talk of people, dinosaurs, or even advanced technologies. However, the finds continue to amaze us. In 1912, an iron pot was extracted from a coal seam in Oklahoma, and in 1851, a zinc and silver vase was discovered in Massachusetts, the rock of which is 534 million years old. A metal rod similar to a rack made of aluminum with an admixture of magnesium was found in Russia. Its origin is even more mysterious. Aluminum was discovered only in 1825, and the age of the coal in which it was found exceeds 300 million years. Scientists have found that the metal is saturated with carbon, which confirms its incredible age. But if so, who made it? Some believe that these finds are traces of a vanished civilization that existed long before us, but was wiped off the face of the planet by a global cataclysm. Others suggest that the objects could have been left by aliens or even time travelers. Skeptics, in turn, are sure that this is a hoax or dating error. There is also a theory that coal was formed not millions but only a few thousand years ago under the influence of deep gases and pressure. If so, then the artifacts may not be so ancient at all. Lost cities in the Sahara. In old satellite images of the Sahara, in areas where there seems to be nothing, strange shapes began to appear. Straight lines, squares, sometimes semicircles like the bases of domes. At first, scientists attributed this to geology, but when the shapes began to repeat, it became clear this was not nature. There are especially many of these phantom structures in the southwest of Egypt in the Gilf Kebir region, where today there is only sand. There could once have been entire settlements, and not Bedouin ones, stone, proportional, with the remains of walls from which you can even guess the street grid. Now these objects are buried. No one digs them up. Local tribes say it is better not to go there. They say that there are forgotten places there, left over from those who came before the sun. Shiva's gold. In the village of Kovalur in southern India, workers found a sealed clay pot under the floor of an old temple dedicated to Shiva. Inside were 103 gold coins, each the size of a small button, bearing clear symbols and inscriptions. Research has shown that the coins were minted around the 13th century during the time of the Pandya and Chola dynasties of South India. This is not a treasure trove in the traditional sense. Such vessels were often buried directly under the altar, as a sacrifice to the gods or a way to preserve the temple's wealth. The coins lay evenly, layer after layer, with no signs of haste. Judging by the location of the find, they were placed deliberately. not hidden from enemies but kept as a sacred reserve. Some coins depict a tiger, the symbol of the Chola dynasty, while others depict a fish, the symbol of the Pandya dynasty. They were minted at the turn of the epochs, when the old kingdom was fading and the new one was just beginning to emerge. Perhaps this is why the gold ended up here, as a symbol of transition, protected by the temple. Now numismatists are studying the coins, comparing the alloy, the stamps, and the ornamentation. Such finds help reconstruct not only the economy but also trade routes. Chola gold circulated far beyond India, reaching Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, but perhaps the most intriguing detail is that the small temple in the rural village has survived centuries, changing faiths and regimes, and the pot of coins has lain beneath the floor all this time, right under the feet of those praying. Power that outlasts all. There's a strange feature in Chinese chronicles that European historians usually overlook because it doesn't fit into the conventional understanding of monarchy. There, it's almost unimportant who exactly sits on the throne. Emperors' names change, dynasties fall, capitals burn, but the system of government continues to function. Not always perfectly, but continuously. This is evident in tax registers, land registries, lists of officials, and censuses. Even when the country is officially in disarray, grain collection, ration distribution, mobilization, trials, and construction never cease completely. This is impossible when power rests on a personal basis. When looking at the structure of imperial China, the first thing that strikes you is that the emperor's role is almost always symbolic. He approves, but he doesn't govern. He issues decrees that others write. He appoints people he doesn't select. Real decisions are made in an apparatus that exists separately from the dynasty. This apparatus is older than most empires and outlives them all. The key to this is the examination system. It dates back to the Han dynasty and takes its final form under the Tang and Song dynasties. An official in China is not a nobleman, a favorite, or a relative of the ruler. They are individuals who have undergone years of selection. Examinations don't test loyalty to the emperor, they test knowledge of the system, laws, rituals, procedures, and reporting. An official belongs not to a dynasty but to a mechanism. This is precisely why, after a change of emperor, most of the administration remains in place. The faces change, but the system does not. This is especially evident in times of catastrophe. In 1644, the Ming dynasty falls. The capital is captured, the emperor is dead, and the state formally ceases to exist. But provincial archives show that tax collection continues, warehouses are operational, and officials sign documents with the same seals they used the year before. A few years later, the new Qing dynasty arises, and it doesn't need to recreate the state. One already exists. It simply adopts a new symbol. When you read Chinese administrative regulations, it becomes clear that the emperor is not the pinnacle, but the interface. The system doesn't wait for decisions from above. It operates according to procedures, and these procedures are more important than any individual. Even during periods when emperors were children, mentally ill, or effectively isolated, the state continued to function. This is recorded not in legends, but in accounting records. Rations were issued, canals were cleaned, grain was redistributed, armies were supplied. The most illustrative example is the late Qing Empire. By the 19th century, emperors had almost no control over the country. Real power rested with officials and regional administrators. They decide what to implement and what to ignore. They suppress rebellions, collect money, and build infrastructure. And when the empire officially ended in 1911, the system didn't disappear. The same people continued to govern the provinces, now in the name of the Republic. The name changed, but the mechanism remained. This is fundamentally different from Rome, Egypt, and Europe. There, the mechanism was tied to a specific individual. In China, it was completely separated from the individual. And this makes the Chinese example the purest proof of the principle. Power can exist without a face. An emperor isn't a ruler, but a node in a system through which legitimacy flows. If a node disappears, the system simply plugs in another one. This is precisely why Chinese history has so many dynasties and so few real breaks in governance. Names change, rituals change, titles shift, but the structure remains. And if we look at this without romanticism, it becomes clear. What we see here is not an exception, but a developed form of the same structure previously observed in Rome, Egypt, Europe, and Russia. Only in China they stopped hiding it. There, it was simply accepted as the norm. skulls of the wrong type. When archaeologists began systematically opening tombs in southern Egypt and Nubia at the beginning of the 20th century, they noticed something strange. Some of the skulls they found did not correspond to human anatomy. Yes, they had eye sockets, a jaw, a parietal part, but everything was abnormal. Elongated occiputs, disproportionately large brain cases, the absence of sutures that a normal skull should have. Some skulls were so elongated that they resembled cones, as if they had been artificially deformed, but no traces of artificial deformation were found. Later, in the 1950s and 60s, British and French anatomists began discussing these finds at closed conferences, but there were almost no official publications. Why? Perhaps because these skulls were found not only in Egypt. Similar shapes were found in Peru, Mexico, even in the Caucasus. Age, from 2,000 to 5,000 years. Different continents, different cultures, the same result. There is an opinion that elongated skulls are the result of special head bandaging in infancy. This was done, for example, by the Mayans, but in a number of Egyptian finds, the bone structure suggests the opposite. The shape was originally like this, and if this is not a disease, then it is a species, another not ours, or ours, but forgotten. Some images in the temples even enhance this feeling. They show creatures with elongated heads in special headdresses, perhaps not to decorate, but to hide, or on the contrary, to mark. Because if these skulls are not a fake, not an accident, and not a deviation, then who did the Egyptians live with? Why did they put on someone else's mask? In Egypt, near Saqqara, archaeologists discovered a sarcophagus that at first glance looked familiar, wooden, painted with a gilded mask. But upon examination, it became clear the mask did not belong to the person inside. The tomb dates back to approximately the 7th century BC, a time when Egypt was experiencing a period of crisis and frequent dynastic changes. In those years, funeral workshops operated like a conveyor belt. Old sarcophagi were often renewed and reused. Here it seems the same thing happened. The mask, inlaid with glazed inserts, was removed from another sarcophagus and roughly adjusted to fit the new face. Even the fastenings at the neck do not match inside, lay the body of a middle-aged man. Remnants of bandages and amulets, typical of the Memphis necropolis, were preserved on him. There are no signs of wealth, only the meticulous work of mummifiers. Apparently, the man was not of noble birth, but perhaps a priest or official. Only space is drier. If anywhere on Earth you can feel the breath of another planet, it's the Atacama. This strip of land, sandwiched between the Andes and the coastal Cordillera, hasn't seen rain in 400 years. The air here is so dry that metal rusts slower than humans age, but it's precisely this absolute lifelessness that has made the desert a prime laboratory for space exploration. In San Pedro de Atacama, the air smells of sulfur and salt. During the day, the heat warms up the sand to 40 degrees Celsius, and at night the temperature drops below freezing. There's a silence in which even footsteps sound like gunshots. Everything here is designed for looking up. At an altitude of over 4,000 meters, where the thin air rings like glass, giant antennas stand in a row. ALMA, the Magellan Telescope, and the Very Large Telescope. They capture light that has been traveling to us for billions of years and dissipate it into the finest bands, like a researcher piecing together the universe's past. When you look at these gigantic antennas, you feel they resemble not machines, but living beings, listening to the universe. Their aluminum ears catch the breath of stars, the cold rustle of intergalactic dust, the echoes of distant flashes. In the Atacama, a person literally finds himself between two worlds, rock and space. Sometimes at night, local guides turn off their headlights and the sky turns into a black dome, dotted with millions of needles of light. People stand in silence and watch the Milky Veil rise behind the mountains. At that moment, it becomes clear. If there is one place on Earth where you can hear the universe, it is here, in a place where only space is drier. The map that no one printed. In the archives of one of the European libraries, lost among the manuscripts of the 17th century, there is a map on which Egypt looks different. It is drawn by hand. with details, rivers, ridges, temples, but some things on it do not match. In the area of the modern desert where according to the official version there was nothing, cities are indicated, with names, with streets. Some are in places where now there is only sand and rocky plateaus. When this map was first digitized, researchers thought that the author had simply made a mistake or made it up, but then satellite images showed that outlines similar to city forms are indeed there, under the sand. They are not visible from the ground, only from above. Who made this map? Where did he get data that even Napoleon did not have? One of the names on it coincides with the ancient Egyptian word meaning gate of return. Some are sure that this map is a copy of an even more ancient source, lost or hidden, and that means someone had information about Egypt that we will never see again. When a face is unneeded. In the 20th century, something happened that had never happened before. For the first time, power ceased to need a specific person at all. Previously, the mechanism had always been tied to a figure: the emperor, the pharaoh, the king, the leader. Even in China, the emperor remained the point of legitimacy. But in the 20th century, this point disappears. Government becomes autonomous. This is evident not in slogans or portraits, but in documents. In 1917, the monarch disappeared in Russia, but the state did not. A few months later, a structure emerges that appears new on the surface, but in fact uses the old administrative grid. The same provinces, the same archives, the same accounting systems, the same supply routes. The names change, but the functions do not. Power ceases to be personal and becomes apparatus-based. The same thing is happening in Germany. After its defeat in World War I, the country was destined to collapse. The economy is destroyed, the army is disbanded, the emperor has fled. But the ministries continue to function. Finance departments collect taxes. Municipalities keep population records. Archives are preserved. When a new leader emerges in 1933, they don't build a system from scratch. They simply gain access to an existing apparatus. And it is this apparatus that makes everything else possible: laws, mobilization, industry, camps, war. Without it, no ideology would work. In the United States, the process is even more visible because it is enshrined in regulations. At the beginning of the century, a permanent federal administration is established there. Departments, agencies, and commissions are independent of presidential changes. They write regulations, formulate budgets, and establish procedures that are binding on all subsequent governments. The president changes every 4 years, but the apparatus remains. It is the apparatus that determines what will actually be implemented. After World War II, this system becomes global. Supranational structures emerge that are not elected but make decisions. International funds, commissions, organizations, agencies. Their employees are not politicians, but they write the rules by which countries operate. They are not individuals. They are documents, procedures, regulations, standards, reporting. This is no longer the power of an individual or even the power of a group. It is the power of a process. The most telling thing is that after the death or departure of leaders, nothing collapses. Stalin dies. The system continues to function. Churchill leaves. Britain remains Britain. A change of administration in the US, the course changes at the level of rhetoric, but not at the level of mechanisms. Power is no longer connected to the body. It is embedded in the structure. If in Rome the mechanism was close to the person, in Egypt it was behind the person, in Europe it outlived the person, in China it was independent of the person, then in the 20th century the person becomes unnecessary. They can be replaced, removed, discredited, destroyed, and the system will continue to function. This is precisely why this century has seen so many regime changes and so few real breakdowns in governance. And here something appears that did not exist before. Accountability disappears. If power is a person, they can be killed, overthrown, blamed. If power is a mechanism, there is no one to blame. Documents bear no responsibility. Procedures offer no repentance. Instructions don't answer questions. And it's at this point that history ceases to be the history of people and becomes the history of structures. Goddess of Death. Cyprus, Lem settlement, a small limestone figurine from around 3.5 thousand years BC. A female silhouette, broad shoulders, arms at the side, a stump head. Usually, such figurines are interpreted as fertility figurines, but with this one, everything went wrong. The first modern owner was Lord Elfont. Within 6 years, all 7 members of his family died. The figurine was passed on. And similar stories happened in the next 3 houses. Sudden deaths, illnesses, accidents. When the new owner suspected a connection, he donated the figurine to the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh. There, the rumors only grew stronger. One of the curators working with the exhibit died within a year. This is how the nickname Goddess of Death was born. What is real and what is legend? There are few documents on the early owners. The dates do not always match. Probably part of the curse grew out of coincidences and retellings in the press, but the chain itself is so frightening that the figure has firmly established itself in the cursed collections along with Egyptian mummies and Bassano vases. The irony is that initially it was most likely made as a symbol of life and fertility, a statue of a goddess who should bring children and not take them. Today, the exhibit is shown with the caveat, archaeology is a fact. The curse is the culture around the fact. But if I talk about strange finds, I can't pass by the Lemba goddess, a rare case when a small piece of limestone gave birth to a legend that survived the 4,000-year journey from a Cypriot village to a museum display case. A gift from the fairies. In Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye, a piece of cloth hangs under glass, which the MacLeod clan calls Ambroch Sith, the fairy banner. It appears to be worn silk, a yellowish-brown background, red dots, and what once were gold crosses. It's about 45 centimeters long. In the 20th century, it was sealed in an airtight display case to prevent the fabric from unraveling. Its origin is controversial. English archaeologist Alan Weiss suggested it was Syrian or Greek silk, perhaps even part of a relic. The clan chief simply replied, "It was given to my ancestor by the fairies." There are 3 versions of its origin. In one, the clan's ancestor, returning from the Crusades on the advice of a hermit, defeated a spirit, the daughter of thunder, and fashioned a banner and staff from her belt and spear. In the second, a fairy covered the crying infant heir in the tower with a silk scarf at night. In the morning, her singing was said to be heard in the hall. In the third, the chieftain married the fairy, and when they parted on the fairy bridge, she handed him a silk cloth and said it would grant the clan 3 victories. No more. The banner was credited with more than just military success. It was used to heal cattle, to solicit harvests, and even to lure herring into the lake near Dunvegan. But according to legend, the power only works 3 times. After that, the cloth will disappear, leaving the clan defenseless. It is believed that it was unfurled twice in the 14th and 15th centuries, leaving only one remaining. During World War II, rumor circulated that Churchill asked the MacLeods to raise the banner for the Allies, but the clan refused. They were saving their last chance. Today, the banner still hangs in a sealed display case, suspended between the theory of distant silk and the family's belief in a gift from the fairies. For the museum's curator, it's a rare fabric with a complex history. For the clan, it's an insurance policy not to be wasted. In both cases, this scrap of silk continues to do its job. It holds memories and defines the boundaries of what those who hang a banner with 3 chances over their hearths are willing to believe. A person can't fit in there. Inside the Great Pyramid, there are strange passages that for decades were thought to be ventilation shafts. But the problem is that neither air nor humans have ever gotten through. These shafts start in the so-called Queen's Room and extend upward at an acute angle, resting against stone plugs with copper inserts. At first, they weren't even taken seriously, and then they sent a robot there. In 1993, engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink designed a mechanism that could get through. It crawled along the smooth walls as if the shaft had been specially polished. At the end of its path, the robot came across a stone slab with 2 pins that resembled door handles. It seemed that something was hidden behind it, but it was urgently recalled. Archaeologists remained silent. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for a second attempt, and Gantenbrink was simply removed from the project. The second robot, launched later, made a tiny hole, and behind it was another chamber. It is unclear whether it was empty or whether no one wants to talk about what was found in it. These shafts could not have been used by anyone in life. They are too narrow, but they are ideal for storing something that should remain untouched. A once-in-a-lifetime experience. 2 years ago, David Dunn, from the British town of Sapkota, Leicestershire, took up metal detecting to spend more time outdoors. One day, his intuition told him to return to a pasture where he had already been. After several hours of searching, the device gave a weak signal. In the ground, David found 2 Roman coins, and then, having dug 60 centimeter deeper, he extracted as many as 50 ancient silver coins. The oldest of them date back to the reign of Carausius, who ruled Britain during the late Roman Empire. The rest were minted under Electus, Diocletian, and Maximian, meaning the hoard is at least 1,700 years old. Such finds happen once in a lifetime. The coins will go to auction and are expected to bring David about $1,800. However, he says that money is not the main thing for him.
Medieval chair. The Trossingen chair is a rare and valuable example of early medieval furniture. This wooden chair was found in a man's burial chamber in Trossingen, Germany, and dates back to around 580 AD. Made from maple and ash, it demonstrates the high level of craftsmanship of the ancient craftsmen. The chair is remarkably well preserved due to the fact that the burial was located in a marshy area, which created favorable conditions for preventing the decomposition of organic materials. The wood, although darkened over time, has retained its structure, allowing archaeologists to study the construction and style of manufacture. The find is in the collection of the Archaeological Museum of Baden-Württemberg in Constance, Germany. 2,000-year-old fig. Irish archaeologists have made a surprising discovery when they found the charred remains of a 2,000-year-old fig tree on Drumnach Point north of Dublin. The find is important evidence that the Roman Empire, which once considered Ireland untouchable, did have an impact on its culture. Drumnach Point was a key point of contact between Ireland and Roman-ruled England. The fig was the most surprising of the finds made by researchers from University College Dublin. The seeds of the fruit confirm that it was brought to the island at a time when such exotic fruits were considered rare. Figs had previously only been found in medieval strata in Ireland, but this is the oldest known. As well as the figs, traces of spelt were found, a grain widely consumed in Roman Britain but rare in Ireland. The finds show that the Romans not only traded goods but also transferred lifestyles. Archaeologist Christine Baker said that the people of Ireland at the time enjoyed spelt bread, olive oil, wine in used glass, and ceramic dishes, brooches, and beads. Figs, first grown in eastern Turkey and northern India, were carried by ancient trade routes to the Mediterranean, where they became an important part of the Roman diet. Researchers believe that figs and spelt may have been brought through Roman Chester, a major trading post in Britain.
Molten fortresses. In the Scottish Highlands, there are ruins that still baffle archaeologists. At first glance, they appear to be ordinary fortifications from the Bronze and Iron Ages. Stone walls, remains of dwellings, and traces of fires. But a closer look reveals that the stones have been molten. Entire sections of the walls appear to have been fired. The rocks have fused together, turning into a single glassy monolith. This is not the result of a fire. Sandstone melts at over 1,000 degrees Celsius. To achieve this effect, a fire must be maintained for several days, creating a confined space where heat cannot escape. This means someone didn't simply build these fortresses, they deliberately burned them, turning them into solid blocks. Experiments in the 20th century showed that this effect can only be achieved through artificial control. Scientists Wallace Thornycroft and Vere Gordon-Childe repeated the process. They set fire to a wall made of slabs and wooden layers and lined it with clay. After 3 hours of fire, the structure collapsed, but parts of the stone were indeed fused. It later became clear the temperature had to be maintained for several days with a constant supply of oxygen. In other words, this was a technology, not an accident. Someone, in a time before metal was in common use, already understood how to control heat. Similar forts were later found throughout northern Europe. More than 200 sites where stone was melted by people. Why exactly then, no one knows. But this strange knowledge of fire, which doesn't destroy but binds, has a sense of something too sophisticated for its time. As if this isn't just ancient engineering, but a technology passed down from time immemorial, the meaning of which we still can't decipher. After all, we could have seen similar technology in ancient Egypt with its melted steps. Letters from the future. In one of the temples of Abydos on the ceiling beam, there is a carving that still baffles even those who deny any conspiracy theories. There, next to the classical hieroglyphs, the outlines of a helicopter are clearly visible. Below is something that looks like a tank or a submarine, another object that resembles a drone with 4 blades. The shape, the details are too precise to be a coincidence. Official science claims that this is a palimpsest, the result of the fact that later priests carved new symbols over the old ones. Allegedly, part of the plaster crumbled over time, and the superimposed images created an optical illusion. But why then is this illusion so clear? Why were the figures complete? And most importantly, why do they look like 20th century technology and not abstract signs? And this is not an isolated case. The temples of Dendera and Edfu also contain images that are too technological for their era. The Dendera lamp is the most famous example, a giant glass bulb with conductive elements inside. Egyptologists say it is a symbol of the origin of life, and engineers say it is almost a diagram of a vacuum tube. Some inscriptions contain terms that have not yet been translated, not because they have been forgotten, but because their structure does not fit into known grammar. Mound under the fort. Russia. Salakard, territory of the Abdorsky Fort. When digging a trench, they uncovered a burial ground of the Neolithic period, about 5,000 years old. More than 12.5 burials. The rituals are different. Some bodies are tightly wrapped in birch bark. Others lie in boats, miniature vessels for the journey to the underworld. The burial pits were dug up to 2 meters deep with steps down, a reverse staircase like an inverted ziggurat. The walls were lined with boards, everything was generously sprinkled with ochre. On top was a wooden flooring, then an embankment. Inverted vessels were placed on the embankment. The soil sank. The vessels fell inside and preserved the layer. In a number of chambers, there are traces of fire. They were set on fire before the final backfill. The dead were also sprinkled with ochre and supplied with things. The main sensation is ancient copper items, a trapezoid pendant, fragments of a bronze plate, and small parts. In the Arctic 5,000 years ago, metal was either a long-distance exchange or a chain of intermediaries, which means that Northerners did not live in isolation. Before us is not a boring cemetery, but a whole collection of artifacts and rituals. Birch bark as a cocoon, a boat as a symbol of transition, fire as purification, ochre as the blood of the earth, copper as prestige. The North shows that complex rituals and long-distance connections reached here much earlier than we are accustomed to thinking. The first biological weapon. Scientists have confirmed a shocking story about a biological weapon used 800 years ago in Norway. During excavations in the ruins of Sverresborg Castle, archaeologists found the remains of a man who was thrown into a well to poison the water during the height of the medieval civil war in Norway. The story is described in the Scandinavian chronicle Sverre Saga, but many historians doubted its authenticity. According to the saga, during the siege of Sverresborg, a group supporting the archbishop known as the Baglers, having failed to find King Sverre Sigurdsson, decided to use the corpse as a means of poisoning the water. To confirm this, a team of scientists conducted DNA analysis of the remains found at the bottom of the well. Back in 1938, archaeologists found the intact remains of a man in a well at a depth of 6 meters, but further research was interrupted due to World War II. It wasn't until 2016 that scientists were able to conduct further excavations, which revealed that the well man was a man in his 30s or 40s with a head injury, which may have been the cause of his death. There was no clothing around him except for a preserved leather boot. DNA analysis and radiocarbon dating confirmed that the remains did indeed date to the conflict period. Artifacts that are not shown. You will be surprised, but not all archaeological finds reach museum display cases. Some disappear even before official documentation. They are not written about in press releases, they are not shown on TV, they are not even included in scientific catalogs. They are either lost or hidden, sometimes by order from above, sometimes to avoid problems, and sometimes because no one wants to explain what it is. In one of the expeditions of the 1970s, which was accidentally mentioned by a former assistant of the Cairo Museum, they were talking about a copper disc that was found. On its surface, there were symbols that could not be compared with any known writing. The object was delivered to storage, and a month later, lost. Later, photographs were found. On them, the disc, and something similar to a map of the starry sky. Only not ours. There is also evidence that in the burials of the 5th dynasty, objects were found made of strange alloys that cannot be analyzed.
One of the archaeologists who kept a copy of the report claimed, "This is not bronze, gold, or silver. Something else. Where they are now, no one knows." Someone will say that this is a myth, but then why is access to the storage of the Cairo Museum closed to most researchers? Why can't even Egyptian scientists get there without special permission? These objects could explain a lot, or call too much into question.
Mars sold at auction. A small piece of rock weighing 24.5 kilograms was brought into the auction room at Sotheby's in London. But this isn't just any rock, it's a fragment of Mars, catalogued as NWA 16788. It's the largest known Martian meteorite found on Earth. It sold for $5.3 million, and as usual, the buyer's name was not revealed. The story of this discovery began in 2023 in the Sahara Desert in Niger. Local prospectors spotted a brownish-red chunk covered in a molten crust among the sand. This is how the surface forms upon atmospheric entry, the moment when the space rock burns and melts on the outside but remains cool on the inside. This hue is Martian, and its surface chemistry is completely consistent with the samples once returned to Earth by the Viking probes. When the meteorite was cut open, it contained olivine crystals, porphyry inclusions, and tiny gas bubbles, identical to those detected in the Martian atmosphere. It's hundreds of millions of years old. This piece was once torn from the planet's surface by an asteroid impact and wandered through space until it fell to Earth. Now it belongs to a private collector. Perhaps it will be displayed in a museum, or perhaps hidden in a safe. It's hard to believe, but it's a fact. Someone now has a fragment of another planet on their shelf, direct evidence that Mars was already sending messages to us long before we learned to send ours. Each such meteorite is more than just a stone. It's a courier that has traveled millions of kilometers to remind us that the connection between Earth and Mars began not with rockets, but with celestial impacts.
3,600 years of silence. For thousands of years, the sand kept the secrets of ancient Thebes, today Luxor, until archaeologists once again looked beneath its centuries-old dust. In recent excavations at the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, scientists have discovered a system of tombs up to 3,600 years old, and with them, portals into the lives and beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. The work has been carried out with the participation of the Zahi Hawass Foundation and the Supreme Council of Antiquities of Egypt since the fall of 2022. Among the finds are bronze coins with the profile of Alexander the Great, children's toys made of baked clay, various ornaments, winged scarabs, and even carved beads. Part of the Temple of Hatshepsut, rock-cut tombs from the Middle Kingdom, and the remains of the Asasif necropolis from the time of the Ptolemies were also discovered here. The burial shafts date back to the 17th dynasty. One of them contained a wooden coffin with the remains of a child. All this helps to better understand how people lived, believed, and died. A special find is the tomb of Jehuti Mes, a courtier associated with Queen Titishri. The inscription indicates that the burial dates back to the 9th year of the reign of Amosi I. Perhaps the war boughs found here indicate the military service of the owner who fought in the expulsion of the Hyksos. In November of the same year, another tomb from the Middle Kingdom with 11 sealed burials was found nearby. Archaeologists are sure that Luxor holds many more such surprises. Each new artifact, be it beads or a war bow, unobtrusively lifts the curtain on the culture and history of pharaonic Egypt.
Hidden essence. This unique Mayan clay figure was found in the Petén region of Guatemala and dates back to the Classic period. The figure is seated in a pose of deep contemplation or ritual gesture, with open palms symbolizing an offering or appeal to the gods. On his head is a mask that evokes associations with modern helmets or even spacesuits, making this artifact the subject of much speculation. The mask could symbolize a connection with the other world or be part of a ceremonial costume designed to imitate gods or spirits. However, some researchers see references to extraterrestrial contacts in its unusualness. Mayan legends often mention sky people who brought knowledge from other worlds, and such iconography could be a symbolic representation of these traditions. The figure also has decorations, a massive medallion and bracelets, which indicates the high status of the person depicted. Perhaps this was the figure of a priest or shaman performing an important ritual role. Metal rod. How can this mysterious artifact be explained? Inside a stone found in the Meizong Mountains of China, collector Jilin Wang discovered a metal rod with a thread resembling a screw. But the strangest thing is that the hard rock formed around it, which suggests that the find could be millions of years old. Some have suggested that this is a meteorite with an alien artifact inside. Others believe that it is an ancient man-made object that, for unknown reasons, ended up in the ground and turned into a fossil. Skeptics believe that this is simply a rare natural formation and the screw is just a fossilized marine organism. But the most interesting thing is that similar finds have already been found in different parts of the world. Coincidence or evidence of an ancient, unknown technology? For now, this artifact remains one of the most mysterious archaeological riddles. Amazonian urns. When a tree fell deep in the Brazilian Amazon, the rounded edges of pottery were revealed beneath its roots. Archaeologists uncovered 7 funerary urns. 2 were particularly large. Inside were human bones, along with those of fish and turtles. The urns lay just 40 centimeters below the surface, likely beneath old houses. There are no ceramic lids. It appears they were covered with organic matter that rotted away. The location is Lake Cochila in the municipality of Fonte Boa. Here on the high floodplains, artificial islands were built hundreds of years ago. This wasn't a whim, but an engineering feat. Soil was brought in, mixed with ceramic fragments, and arranged so that the platform would support the house and prevent it from being submerged by floodwaters. The urns were found on this platform. The pottery contains an unexpected mix of techniques, plus a rare green clay, known only from a few places in the region. Why fish and turtles ended up in the urns alongside people remains an open question. This could have been a ritual element, a household item, or a symbol of a connection with water. For now, these are hypotheses. But the site's organization, artificial islands and recurring vessel shapes, suggests a regular practice, not a one-off. The urns are currently in Tefe's laboratory. Organic dating, isotope analysis, and paste comparisons will be conducted. Perhaps a name for the tradition will emerge. Lipstick from the Bronze Age. In the southeast of Iran, archaeologists have discovered perhaps the oldest lipstick in human history. The age of the find is about 3.5 thousand years. It was a small stone bottle made of the mineral chlorite in which the remains of a cosmetic product were preserved. It turns out that they were striving for bright red, sparkling, and fragrant lips. The lipstick is based on hematite powder, red iron ore, which changes color from black to blood red when crushed. Other minerals were additionally used: braunite, manganite, rhodonite, galena, which gave the desired shade and shine. In total, they occupied about 80% of the composition, mixing with vegetable wax. Finally, aromatic plant fibers and tiny particles of quartz were added to the lipstick so that the lips not only acquired color but also smelled fragrant and shimmered in the sun. Scientists believe that the elongated shape of the bottle was convenient for use with a bronze mirror held in the other hand. Confirmation of this can be found, for example, on the Turin Papyrus No. 55001 from Egypt, which dates back to the 12th century BC. There, a woman paints her lips or eyes using a small brush in one hand and a mirror in the other. A fragment of a dwelling. This surviving section of a Roman leather tent is a fascinating reminder of the lives of the soldiers who guarded Hadrian's Wall in Roman Britain. Built in the early 2nd century AD, the wall stretched for 117 kilometers, dividing the Roman Empire from the barbarian lands to the north. Fort Vercovicium, part of this defensive system, was an important garrison where Roman soldiers lived and served. The tents were made from dozens of goat skins, carefully stitched to withstand the harsh northern climate of Britain. Each contubernium, a group of 8 soldiers, had one of these tents. It was their home, their resting place, and their refuge from the elements. The manufacturing process was so skillful that the seams and joints provided protection from rain and wind, which was crucial in conditions of constant dampness and cold. But the surviving section of the tent raises questions. How could such a fragile material survive for 2,000 years? Archaeologists suggest that it was preserved by the special conditions of the fort's soil as well as the minimal impact of oxygen. Mystics claim that such tents could have been impregnated with special solutions, the secret of which has been lost. Perhaps this is a legacy of knowledge that the ancient Romans could have received from other, more mysterious civilizations. Bright glass beads. Archaeologists studying the Bronze Age in northern Italy have discovered thousands of glass beads dating back more than 3,000 years at the ancient settlement of Fratesina. These vibrant artifacts shed light on the first art of glassmaking in Europe. The team found a Bronze Age clay furnace surrounded by tools and the remains of glassware, a structure that has no analogs in Europe at the time. Among the finds are many multicolored beads that have retained their rich colors, from blue to red, from white to black, with patterns in the form of swirls and spots. Even after thousands of years, their colors remain bright, as if they had just come out of the furnace. The stability of the color is explained by the unique recipe of the local glass created on the basis of sand from the Po River, which gave the products durability. Fratesina, which flourished from 1200 to 1000 BC, was a center of handicraft production and trade. In addition to glass, amber, ivory, bronze, gold, tin, and iron were processed here. Gold jewelry. Here are exquisite gold ear jewelry pieces created in the 1st century BC during the Satavahana dynasty in Andhra Pradesh, India. These pieces are an example of the outstanding craftsmanship of ancient goldsmiths who worked with gold using complex granulation and embossing techniques. The jewelry pieces are massive, curved, and richly decorated. They feature images of animals such as horses and lions, which symbolize strength, power, and protection in Indian culture. The detail is astounding. Every bead, every line is executed with incredible precision. Earrings like these were worn by noble women and perhaps even royalty. Today, these artifacts are a priceless legacy of ancient Indian jewelry art. The First King. Belize, Karakul Jungle. For nearly 40 years, married archaeologists Arlen and Diana Chase dug stairs, markets, and dams here until they reached the heart of the Kayana complex, the heavenly place. Beneath the slabs, they found a narrow passageway that opened onto a chamber painted with cinnabar. On the floor was a skeleton, its shoulders entwined with jade beads. Nearby were 11 painted vessels, carved bone tubes, a mosaic mask, and spondylus shells the color of raw meat. Hieroglyphs on the stelae had long named the city's first ruler Tikabchak, Thunderhand. Now the text matched the bone, dating to around 350, just 2 or 3 decades after his ascension, 331. It turns out that Karakul was an independent force even before the famous arrival of the Teotihuacan envoys in 378. It did not wake up from foreign influence. It already ruled, traded, and collected tribute. The things around the body speak for themselves. Jade is a sign of royal blood, cinnabar is a symbol of strength and sacrifice, spondylus shells are long-distance trade through the Caribbean, and thin bone tubes are an attribute of priests who inhaled cocoa powder before rituals. All this is not a random collection, but a portrait of a state, collected in the personal capsule of its founder. For scientists, this is not just a skeleton, but the first chapter of the history of Karakul, hidden by vines for almost 1,500 years.
Oldest human tooth. Scientists have announced a sensational discovery in Germany. Ancient dental fossils estimated to be almost 10 million years old that they say do not fit into the established chronology of human history. What's truly shocking is that one of these fossils resembles the teeth of man's earliest ancestors. However, until now, such teeth have only been found in Africa, not Europe, and even then the existing range of fossils is millions of years younger. Found in September 2016 near the German city of Eppelsheim, 2 well-preserved teeth date back to approximately 9.7 million years ago. One of the teeth, an upper right first molar, is similar in characteristics to other specimens found in the area, but the other tooth, the upper left canine, is different, and the researchers say its outline and shape are similar to those of hominin species, including Australopithecus afarensis. The problem is that Lucy is estimated to be only 3 million years old, and it is believed that humanity's earliest ancestors began their migration from Africa to Europe and Asia approximately 100,000 years ago. So the question is, who did these teeth belong to? Which were in the wrong place and at the wrong time, and how did they get there? Lost Bible text. Archaeologists have found a unique 5th century amulet in Turkey depicting King Solomon defeating the devil. The 1,600-year-old bronze pendant is engraved with the ancient Greek inscription, "Our Lord has defeated the devil." This artifact may be related to a lost Bible text that speaks of Solomon's magical powers. Sources claim that during the 1st, 5th centuries, there was a text called the Testament of Solomon, which was not included in the canon. In this text, Archangel Michael gives Solomon a magic ring that allows him to control demons. The amulet confirms that Solomon was perceived not only as a wise king, but also as a champion of evil. The artifact was discovered among the ruins of an ancient military structure in Adrianople, modern Edirne. The amulet probably belonged to a soldier who believed in Solomon's magical protection. The reverse side of the pendant is engraved with the names of the archangels: Azrael, Israfel, Gabriel, and Michael. This symbolizes protection from evil, uniting the traditions of different religions. Azrael is known as the angel of death in Judaism and Islam. Israfel is the herald of the end of the world, blowing the trumpet on the day of judgment. Gabriel and Michael are widely revered in Christianity. The first is the messenger of God, the second is a spiritual warrior. All these names enhance the protective meaning of the amulet. The amulet with Solomon is not just a historical find, it demonstrates how legends and religious traditions intertwine in different eras. The figure of Solomon unites 3 world religions, remaining a symbol of wisdom and strength.
Preserved body. In 1719, miners at the Fallon copper mine in Sweden made a sinister discovery. They pulled out the body of a man without legs from a flooded area, but it was remarkably well preserved. Judging by his clothes and appearance, it seemed that he had died just a few days ago. This looked very strange considering that the abandoned mine had not been used for many years. The body was put on public display, hoping to find relatives or acquaintances. Soon, Margareta Olsdotter appeared, claiming that in front of her was her fiancé who had disappeared 42 years ago. When the water was pumped out, it turned out that the deceased was soaked in a solution of vitriol, copper sulfate, which protected his remains from rapid decomposition. However, as it dried out, this natural preservation began to petrify the body and then disintegrate. Alas, the fate of the unfortunate man did not end with a simple burial. Local residents, shocked by such a rare phenomenon, kept his body for another 30 years for the amusement of the public. Only then did they bury him in the church. Sometime later, during another reconstruction, the body was discovered again. This time, they decided to finally bury him in the city cemetery. Psychoactive vessels. In 2024, archaeologists discovered a vessel in the temple of the goddess Hathor, on the walls of which was depicted the smiling god Bes, the patron of dreams, childbirth, and, as it turned out, something much stranger. Traces of a substance were preserved inside the vessel. Its chemical analysis gave an unexpected result: a mixture of alcohol, honey, and psychoactive components, including those that cause strong visual hallucinations. In fact, it was an ancient psychotropic cocktail. What is even stranger is that the vessel was ritual. Its contents apparently were not used for pleasure, but for communication, perhaps with the gods, perhaps with the dead, or maybe with those whom the Egyptians themselves did not fully understand, but whose presence they felt. In the same complex, images of creatures with disproportionate bodies and eyes were found, too strange to be just allegories. It is believed that Egyptian priests used such mixtures to enter special states. During these rituals, they allegedly received knowledge that could not be conveyed in words. It was from such immersions that prophecies, geometric patterns, and architectural solutions emerged. What if the Great Pyramid is also the result of someone's revelation? The School of World Governance. Almost all of European history is written as if the Vatican is a succession of popes. One died, another came, a third reformed, a fourth made a mistake. But if you open the internal documents of the Curia, it becomes clear that the popes almost never governed the church themselves. It was governed by people whose names are never studied, because without them, the popes made no decisions. In the 16th century, at a time when Europe was split between Catholics and Protestants, the pope was formally the head of the entire Christian world. But he didn't make the decisions. They were made by the Roman Curia, a permanent apparatus that remained unchanged for decades. Popes come, the Curia remains, and it is the Curia that determines which reforms will be adopted, which wars will be supported, which kings will be recognized, and which will be declared heretics. The most interesting things begin when the Pope tries to govern himself. In 1492, Alexander VI Borgia became Pope. He is commonly described as a monster, a debauchee, a symbol of corruption. But if you look at the documents, he is one of the few popes who actually attempted to intervene in government. And that is precisely why a systemic war within the Curia erupts against him. Decisions are blocked, decrees are sabotaged, legates fail to carry out orders. Ultimately, after his death, the Curia quickly regains control, and the image of Borgia is forever cemented as demonic, not for his sins, but for attempting to directly control the system. The Vatican best illustrates this pattern in one specific episode where everything comes to light. 1527. Rome is sacked by the troops of Emperor Charles V. Pope Clement VII is effectively locked in Castel Sant'Angelo. The city is in ruins. The Pope is formally the head of the world, but he doesn't even control the street beneath his windows. And it is at this moment that something rarely described in textbooks begins to operate. Not the will of the Pope, but the Chancery. Embassies continue to receive instructions. Correspondence continues. Agreements continue to be made, not because the Pope is strong, but because the Curia has not stopped. A few years later, the Reformation begins in its final phase. The world is changing, and it seems logical that everything hinges on the Pope. But if you look at the actual decisions, the creation of congregations, censorship, diplomacy, taxes, the appointment of legates, the same figures reappear. Cardinals, secretaries, treasurers, people who can survive a change of pope and maintain the course. A pope can have character. He can be gentle or harsh, but he always has a limit, his lifespan and his term of office. The Curia is not bound by this limitation, and this leads to the most unpleasant conclusion, one that upends our entire narrative. In the states we've discussed so far, the second man could disappear, and the system would begin to malfunction. In the Vatican, the second man doesn't disappear because he's distributed. He's not alone. It's a network. This is precisely why the Vatican has survived centuries and retained governance where secular states collapse and rebuild. And this is precisely why the Vatican model is so easily exported. Diplomats, chanceries, permanent departments, instructions, secret correspondence, governance through formulations and powers. This isn't mysticism, it's technology. And when it reaches Europe, it transforms into the state system we're accustomed to. The same thing happens with Pope Paul IV in 1555. He tries to break the power of the Curia, dismiss the old cardinals, and rewrite the financial flows. 4 years after his death, a crowd in Rome destroys his statues, and the Curia repeals almost all of his reforms. This is recorded in the minutes. The system simply rolled back. But the most telling case is Pope Sixtus V. He does something almost no one else has done. He rewrites the entire administrative structure of the Vatican. He creates permanent congregations, consolidates powers, and deprives individual cardinals of autonomy. And this, for the first time, makes the Pope a true manager. But it is precisely after this that his successors quickly return to the old model, because a Pope who governs is dangerous. By the 17th century, the model becomes definitive. The Pope is a symbol. The Curia is a mechanism. The Pope can speak, bless, and pronounce, but he cannot govern. Cardinals outlive 5, 6, 7 popes in a row. They are the ones who negotiate, control finances, write instructions, and shape doctrine. And here something happens that completely changes the perception of the entire story we just told. Rome, Egypt, France, Russia, China, everywhere, the mechanism was present alongside the ruler. But in the Vatican, it survived the centuries and became invisible. And it was from the Vatican that this model spread to Europe. Diplomacy, chanceries, congregations, secret instructions, governance through documents rather than orders, all of this was first developed not in states, but in the church, and then copied by secular power. The French bureaucracy, the Austrian administration, the Russian chancery, the German departments, all are direct descendants of the Curia. This is precisely why popes in history seem weak, strange, or secondary. They weren't an authority, they were a face, like Augustus, like Thutmose, like Napoleon, like Peter. But unlike them, in the Vatican, the mechanism didn't disappear. It survived, it became a school, and if you put this block at the end, it suddenly becomes clear that all this time we've been studying not exceptions, but stages of learning. History is not a succession of rulers. It is the evolution of a method of concealing governance. I'm so grateful you watched this video to the end, and I'd love for you to share it with your friends. Bye everyone, and see you in the next video.